Thank you very much. As Theo said, my name is Sara Wigginton, and I am from the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center. We are a program of the Barnstable County Department of Health and Environment, and we actually we're part of the wastewater division, and we are a program of that division. So today I'm going to be talking about MASSTC, and I'm also going to be talking about our innovative alternative IA septic system database. And mostly I'm going to be talking about nitrogen, keeping with the theme of the day. And I'm going to be talking about what we have been able to learn from collecting this data in a centralized database for the whole county. So here we have an aerial view of the test center. That is our quality assurance officer, Emily Michelle Olmstead. And if you've ever been to the test center, you know that it is kind of not a lot to look at. When you get there, it is modular trailers surrounded by little sheds and pipes sticking out of the ground.
Where is it?
Oh, it's right by Joint Base Cape Cod. And so we're actually located sort of outside of the gate, but on Joint Base Cape Cod property. And if you know anything about on-site wastewater treatment, you know that the magic is happening underground. So that sort of is the explanation for why it doesn't look like there is a whole lot going on there. It's all happening in the subsurface. So as I mentioned, we are the wastewater division, which is a division of the Department of Health and Environment. MASSTC is one of the 4 programs that we have for the wastewater division. We also have the Advanced Septic System Tracking Database, or the IA database. We have a couple of other programs that my colleague is going to talk about after I speak, and that's the Aquafund and the Septic Utility Program. These 4 programs make up the wastewater division. So I'm going to speak specifically about MASSTC and the IA database. I'm going to start with talking about MASSTC. So if you have heard of us, you might know that we are one of the premier third-party testing facilities for septic system technology. We're one of only 3 in North America. We were established in 1999 by a gentleman, George Hoyfelder, many of you probably know his name, with a couple of his colleagues who identified a need for third-party testing of IA systems that were making claims to do, remove nitrogen, provide secondary treatment, several claims that needed third-party verification. We have global reach, we have international systems that get tested, and we really are just the test bed for these advanced septic systems. So on our site, we have, you saw that aerial view with all of the, pipes sticking out of the grounds and the little sheds. Each one of those is a test bed for a system that is doing research and development or going through certifications. So pretty much all of the advanced treatment technologies that exist in the country, most of them have at some point been through MASSTC for some sort of testing or for research and development. We also do a lot of public tours. We about twice a month do public tours, so please reach out to us if you want to come check out our site and get a tour and talk really specific about the technologies that we have there. And then we also do outreach like this, and we also have a library tour if you're interested in some more general outreach. So to give us a little context for where we are today, I know that this is a room that I don't really need to paint this picture. We've all sort of been talking about this all day, but just sort of take a step back. In the early 90s, nitrogen was identified as a problem in the Cape Cod estuaries, maybe even slightly before that. The late 90s, there was an update to Title V, 1995, and that's when alternative systems began to enter the scene. And that's when MASSTC opens to provide that third-party verification testing. The 2000s, there's technologies that begin to be established. We get more of these IA technologies. 2010s, more advanced technologies begin to emerge, and now we are here, where Title V has been updated yet again to include that best available nitrogen-reducing technology in nitrogen-sensitive areas. So this was sort of pointed out, I think, in Scott's talk, that we haven't actually taken a look at septic systems today and why they are causing the problems that they're causing. So just in really general terms, this is a standard system. I think this is not going to be unfamiliar to anybody in this room. But we only get, about 35% removal of nitrogen from these systems because they are not designed to remove nitrogen. They're designed to remove pathogens. They do a good job removing pathogens, keeping our water safe for us to drink from a pathogen standpoint, but they do, almost nothing for nitrogen and phosphorus. Definitely not enough. And what happens when they're not removing enough nitrogen? Again, I'm painting a picture that we're all very, very familiar with. We don't want to live in a toxic stew, so we have to do something to address these issues. One of the solutions, in addition to sewering, urine diversion, fertilizer management, is IA technology. We've said IA a bunch of times today. I'm not sure if anyone actually defined innovative alternative nitrogen, talking about nitrogen-removing septic systems in our current landscape. So as Scott said earlier this afternoon, it really is just adding a technology between the Title V elements, between that septic tank and the leach field, to increase nitrogen removal. And with the IA techs that are out there now, we can get up to about 90% removal if we're talking the enhanced innovative alternative systems. All right, so that sort of sets the stage for IA systems, why we have IA systems, how they can be a useful part of the solution to meet our TMDLs. Now I'm going to kind of set the stage for how we manage those. Currently, there are about 4,000 IA systems on the Cape in Barnstable County. If you look, is there a pointer? If there's not a pointer, you guys can, I'll just point. We'll follow along. So the map has dots, and the size of those dots represent how many IA systems are in that town. So each town has a dot. The bigger the dot is, the more IA systems are in that town. All of the data that's in the IA database represents over 50,000 samples, and within those 50,000 samples, there's been over almost 400,000 different data points that we can pull from that. So point of that is there is a lot of data in the IA database. The bottom portion of the graphic here is just showing what it would look like if you are an operator entering that data. And for anyone who isn't familiar with how the IA database works, that is how the data gets into the database. So if you have an innovative alternative system, you are going to have some sort of contract with an operator who is going to sample your system per the approval, once a year, twice a year, 4 times a year. They're going to enter that data into the database, and then we manage the data on the back end. When I say manage, mostly we house it. So the data that is in the database, again, that's operator collected and entered data. They send it off. They take their bottles for sampling out into the field to the IA database, the IA system that they are in charge of. They take their sample bottles, they pull water from the end of the system, and they take it to a lab. Usually you have to have at least 3 bottles to make up the total nitrogen. That's what we're actually interested in. So all of this data in the database is TN, total nitrogen. Total nitrogen is made up of 3 parameters. So you imagine you're doing the sampling, you have 3 little bottles. You have a bottle that's TKN, that's total killable nitrogen, nitrate, nitrite. You add them all up and you get the total nitrogen for that system. So if TKN is 4, nitrate is 1, nitrite is 0.1, it's 5.1 for the total nitrogen. That's a really good performing system. So if you are interested in looking through this data, it is totally publicly available. One of our mottos is have data, share it. So if we have data, we want to make it available for anyone to look at. We know that this data is hugely important to lots of decision makers. And not just decision makers, it's also important to the public as well. So if you are interested in poking around at this data, it is available. It's a little cut off here, but MASSTC.org, and then go to our technologies page. I have it sorted, or filtered rather, to where it's only showing us the systems that have field data. So if you actually go to the technology page, there will be a few more than these. And this is, again, just available for public use, and you can go in and explore. So what you'll find when you go there into the database and look at the publicly available data is going to be a lot of box plots. Box plots are a really useful way to show in general how a system is working, but they can be a little tricky to understand. So before we go any further, I'm just going to give a real brief explanation and then also point out to you what you really actually need to remember for the rest of the slides. So again, a box and whisker is going to give you the spread of the data. So all of the data is going to be compiled into that box. The top whisker, which is the top line, is the maximum. The top 25% of the data cut off by the maximum. And at the bottom, we have the bottom 25% of the data and the minimum. So those two lines represent how the system will sometimes perform and meet those numbers, but usually the system is going to be performing with numbers that match the box. And you'll see a good example here in a moment when we put these box plots on an actual graph. What you really want to pay attention to is the actual box, because the box represents the range of most of the data, about half of it. So 50% of the data is going to be in that box. And this is the part you actually really should listen to if you want to understand the next couple of slides. That line in the middle is the median. And that tells us how the data, how that system usually works. So if you want to look at one of the boxes and say, okay, how does that one box, which represents one system, how does it work? You would look at the line in the middle that represents the median. So to make this make a little bit more sense, I have some real-world database examples. So if you went into that database and clicked on the layer cake systems, it would give you this graph. So to orient you a bit to this graph, we have all of those box plots that I was just describing. Each one of these represents a single house. So this is a house, and that's a house. Each one is a separate system. And the median line, I'm sorry, I wish I had a pointer. The median line, which is the dark blue there, that's how the system usually acts. That's usually what we're getting is about 19 milligrams per liter from that first system. The way that these are just generally graphed is it kind of goes from best to worst. So if you clicked on the layer cake, you would get the best one over on this part of the graph. You have the total nitrogen over here. Again, it's getting just below that green line, which is the 19 milligram per liter standard that many of these systems are approved for. As we kind of go down the line here, you get to the really poor performers whose median value is up at about, what is that, 110 or so. So really high levels coming out of that system, not working at all. And you can see kind of the full gambit of the performance of this system, very household dependent. And there's only a handful of these systems because they are a pilot system, not a provisional or generally approved technology. Here's another example of some real world data. Again, available for anyone to click and peruse. This is an example of the nitro systems. As you can see, there are a number more systems that are included in this technology. It's a provisionally approved technology. And a lot more are meeting that 19 milligram per liter standard that generally these systems are set at. And then you have something that is generally approved. This is an example of the Advantech system, excuse me, with many more systems, and then another sort of wider range of the performance for those, with lots of really good performers and some outliers on the end that never make their limits. Okay, so I'm going to present some data from our database. And the first thing I need to do is give a special thanks to George Hoyfelder and Emily Michelle Olmsted, who are really important in crunching this data and cleaning this data. And I'm going to give you a little bit of detail about how we cleaned that data, because all of that data that is submitted by operators, you see it all on that public interface. If they accidentally typed 100 instead of 10, that's what you see. Currently, we don't have an audit portion of the database. That's something we hope to build, but that doesn't exist right now. So not every single piece of data in the database is reliable. So we just, for this, talking about the most common systems, we just picked the most 6 systems. So if you have I am going to show you what these technologies are later, but I just want us to have an unbiased look at it first. And so we are looking 5 years back at the most common 6 systems. Oh, what I was going to say is, if you see a technology that hey, I know that there's data in a system, it just wasn't one of the most 6 common. It's a 5-year look back, so the data collection has gotten better over the years for a number of reasons. So we're just looking from 2018 to 2013. This represents about half of the systems in the database, this analysis. And then we only looked at sites that had been sampled at least 3 times. And then we removed incomplete data. So sometimes we will get data submitted to the database that doesn't have one of those 3 parameters, doesn't have nitrate, or TK, and one of those 3 is not there, so we threw those out. And then we have, in this first column is the technology. Again, I will unblind that. The second column is the percent of systems that meet that 19 milligram per liter threshold. So if we were, just to bump back to one of those real world examples, it's the percent of systems where the median, that middle of the box, falls below the green bar. So that percent is what we're seeing here. So a couple of takeaways is that technology 1 and technology 5 aren't even getting 40%. That includes, over 800 systems. Technology 2, 3, and 4 are getting 60 to 70%, and then technology 6 is getting nearly 90% with a very variable number of systems installed. And we did not do anything to control for that variable number of systems for this analysis. We're just looking at percentage and number of systems. All right, drum roll. All right, I will say that these little call-out boxes are my opinions based on the data. And it is just pretty evident that the fast and singular are, without a major modification of the technology, are probably not going to be candidates for those EIA systems that we need to have to meet these TMDLs. That doesn't mean that they can't have modifications that would allow them to meet this. It would just take modifications, recertification, retesting. We really hope that the industry will sort of meet these challenges. All right, and then so the other sort of, in my opinion, obvious takeaway from these numbers is that nitro is a really promising candidate for an EIA system. Again, those ones that we're really gonna need to meet 10 milligrams or less most of the time. So really promising candidate. And then what I think is actually the interesting part of the story is these 3 systems that are getting 60 to 70, depending on how they are managed. And that is a really key part of the IA systems, is that they must be managed. They're infrastructure that has to be taken care of. And if we can manage those systems, increase the O&M oversight, the sampling oversight, what numbers could we get from these systems? Who, to me, if you're getting more than 60% success, you're onto something, right? You're a technology that is capable of removing lots of nitrogen. Just how do we get those other 30% on board to meet the TMDLs? All right, and before I turn it over for maybe a couple questions and turn it over to my colleague David, I'm gonna just talk about protecting the assets that we have. We have, I said, 4,000-ish of those units out now. That's gonna be more and more as these new wastewater management plans roll out. And we have to take care of them. So these are just a few pictures of things that I've personally seen in the field for systems that haven't been left for very long. It's been recent since their O&M happened, and there's problems with the pumps, air filters, cracked pipes, and then we also need to make sure that we are sampling and doing a really great job with our data collection and verification. And that is kind of my transition to what David is going to be speaking about, which is the septic utility program, which is what we have to make these systems work and meet our limits and work in the long term. Thank you.
As if you actually need me to say this, but we will now take questions from the audience.
Oh, just call me. Yeah.
Yeah, since a large percentage of homes on Cape Cod are used seasonally, not even in season, not necessarily continuously, what effect does seasonal and non-continuous use of the septic system have on the performance?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And we think that there is a startup period. How long that startup period is, we actually aren't sure, and I think will be kind of technology dependent. And I think it's something that we need to be carefully considerate of when we choose technology for seasonal homes. And short answer is, I don't think we exactly know. We know they're a startup and that they will pick up, but it might take 1 week with one technology, 1 month with another technology. It really depends on how we decide to manage those seasonal systems. But I do think that there are solutions for that lag. And we also need to be carefully consider what the load is from those systems and make sure that we're putting most of our efforts into the systems that are contributing the biggest load. And sometimes that's seasonal, sometimes that's not. It depends on how the seasonal house is being used. And yeah, so that's a tricky question. Yeah.
Sarah, can you talk about what some of those solutions to the lag might be?
Yeah, sure. So Part of it could be keeping a system, somehow keeping it warmer. There are a couple of different technology solutions for that. Another one would be seeding the system with some like active community, microbial community that is already established in another system or from potentially a treatment plant, that kind of thing. So really anything that we can do to kickstart the microorganisms that are doing that work. So that could be additionally a carbon addition before people come back, or a small nitrogen, not maybe addition, but getting the microbes going and ready to do their jobs when they're actually getting the waste stream. So I think that's another thing that the industry does need, a challenge they need to meet.
Are your data the raw data that MASSTC used to create their approved systems?
I think in part. I think that they had other data sources as well.
So looking at the data on your site does not mean that they're approved.
On the public, right. Our site is not, it is just to give the data, again, the data that was collected by the operators with faults and all, and then it's really up to these sorts of analysis that we did and also the sorts of analysis that DEP did to, you know, work out what is the trustable data, and I think they also gathered data from other sources.
So your point about the fast and singular being really poor performers are unlikely to be approved by DEP.
I mean, I can't speak to what DEP will can speak to their approvals. The point is not to beat up on any technology. The point is to say, what can we do to get those to work? Because I think that most of these technologies can work, but some of them are going to take more monitoring, and some of them are going to take design changes.
So when these houses, when you do the testing and they come up well above the 20, like the one that had 90 or 60 or something like that, what does the homeowner have to do? Do they immediately have to like dig up the system and fix it? What is the ramifications of getting a 60 when you're supposed to have 20, 90?
Right now, that is in the hands of the Board of Health, and that really is, it's sort of town dependent and you know, situational dependent about what the outcome of that situation is. It's usually a retest for compliance. And again, Board of Health per town are the folks who are in charge of that.
How did they get to the 19 milligrams per liter numbers, I mean the threshold value?
That was way before my time, but I believe that it is an assumed 50% reduction from what the assumed influent is. But I'm not actually positive about that.
Sarah, I think part of that answer, if I get my history right, so the original system started as a way to protect water quality because of the density of housing, because the facilities on Cape in particular, and so there was a loading rate that was protective of the drinking water concentrations necessary to protect against blue baby syndrome. So that's how that 19 value gets set for those earliest systems, and then later it started to be driven more by environmental concerns. And we're, as you know, we're all trying to deal with those concentrations that are needed now for purposes of GPs.
Well, that's it.
Thank you.